I spent quite a few months diving deep into the research and making this is fully evidence-based and hopefully accessible to all of you at a layperson level, so that it can stuff you can take away and help you. I'm happy to email anyone the slides if you email me. My cards are up there, so always happy to share this stuff. It's not any intellectual property issues with it. I'm happy for more people to benefit from knowing how to stay healthy. Next, please. So the brain. Oh, this is an overview of the talk. So a bit of context, definitions about what we mean, diagnosis, incidence, forecasts, etc. I'll let you read those. So that's what I'll flow through. Take about 35, 40 minutes, I think. So next, please. So what is your greatest health fear? Next, click. These things are pretty scary. I wouldn't want any of those, but I think for a lot of people, next one, please. Losing your mind, losing your mental functions, I think is the most terrifying. I would, hate that. I could still read books and watch movies if I was physically impaired, but with a mental impairment, I'm not sure what sort of quality of life would be left. Next, please. So the brain is super, super complex. 87 billion neurons, a quadrillion neural connections, that's a million billion. Lots of interconnections amongst all the neurons. Brain cells can rejuvenate and resist damage and support growth at any age. So we can improve brain function and increase neural connectivity at any age, which is amazing. Next, please. So just to give you an idea of how energy hungry the brain is, only 2% of our weight, but it consumes 20% of our oxygen and 20% of our blood, of the energy we burn, which is enormous for a tiny organ. It just gives a sense of how powerful and important this is. But it also foreshadows some of the risk factors of not having a healthy diet and lifestyle because of the high oxygen use and energy burn. So a lot of our blood supply goes to the brain and 650 kilometres of blood vessels, which is a lot. So it's easily the hungriest organ in the body. Next, please. And I don't mind if you interject with a question or comment, so I'm not sure if that fits with the plan, but I'm happy to have it as a conversation if you want to jump in if something's not clear. So dementia is an umbrella term of all these different types of things. Alzheimer's is the biggest one by far. Next, please. We had a clicker, but it doesn't work with the software on the computer. So it's caused by brain damage to cells that affects their ability to communicate, affects thinking, behaviours, feelings. Dementia is a disease symptom, not a natural, normal part of ageing. That's an important distinction. So 60 to 80% of cases of dementia are Alzheimer's. It's the biggest one. And it's normally characterised by the plaques that you've probably heard about in these tau tangles. Next one, please. So over 100 diseases that may cause dementia, so these are some of them. And this is the one we hear about with footy players, banging their head. And Muhammad Ali, for example, boxers, that's from the repeated trauma to the head. Next one, please. So there's no one test to determine if someone has dementia. It's based on careful medical history, physical exam, lab tests, etc. Characteristic changes in the thinking, day-to-day function. So there's a whole range of things that enable that detection. This picture illustrates some of those. Next one, please. So it can take decades to build up before it's diagnosable. And I know one of you was saying a parent had dementia and fearful of getting it. So the earlier you can initiate healthy behaviours and diet, the better. Because you can be pre-symptomatic but be building up the damage that leads to it. There is good news on that with early dementia I'll come to, but it seems to be this accumulation of damage from our modern lifestyle, which is unhealthy diet, lack of sleep, stress. I'll come to this in more detail. Next one, please.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
You said early dementia. At what age would you consider early dementia?
Before 65. This is a general cut-off, but yeah, generally doesn't happen that early, much fewer cases, so it's associated with older age.
Yeah.
What's the good news on that?
Well, I'll come to that. If it's early stage, irrespective of the age, if it's early in its development, then you can reverse it to some extent. But once it's significant, it's too late. So this is related. Heart disease begins in childhood. We know from autopsying children who die in car crashes, by age 10, all of them, if they're on a Western diet, have fatty streaks. You can see with the naked eye, which is the first symptom of heart disease, an early symptom, and that builds up decade after decade. So the same vascular damage obviously is going to impact the brain because it has so many 650 kilometres of blood vessels. And so there can be microvascular blockages and micro strokes build up over time to give you vascular dementia. So having a healthy vascular system is really critical. And the Western diet is what leads to the vascular damage, and it's why heart disease and cardiovascular disease are our biggest killers.
What is the Western diet?
Lots of processed food, high in animal food, high in fat, salt, sugar, refined grains, as opposed to traditional cultures who ate more whole grains, they weren't rich enough to have animal food every day, a lot more fruit and veggies. Next one, please. So incidence, 55 million people globally, 60% live in low to middle income countries, which is really hard on those countries which are already struggling with poverty issues. Nearly 500,000 in Australia, second leading cause of death for Australians, 1.6 million people involved in caring for people with dementia. So there's an enormous economic cost to this. Most symptoms appear after age 65, but 10% can develop it before 65. Or not, sorry, 9%. Disproportionate impact on women. It's interesting, we're all women here bar one, and women also provide the bulk of the caring hours, which is still the case in our society, unfortunately. Next, please. So Australia is forecast to double by 2058. I don't know why they picked 58. It's an odd number to pick, but anyway, that's what I had to work with. Huge impact on carers, huge impact on the healthcare system. Globally, 55 million in 2019, up to 139 million by 2050, estimated growth. That's a lot.
There might be an argument that that would increase because of just the demographic, the baby boom.
Partially, yeah.
So is that part of that factor, or is there something
Partly.
else going on?
It's increasing in prevalence as well.
Yeah.
More people are getting it because of all those unhealthy lifestyle behaviours. Next one, please. So the costs, 1.3 trillion globally in 2019. That's expected to go up to 2.8 trillion. Australia 3 billion up to 26.6 billion over 20 years. That's a lot of money, a lot of lost human quality of life years. Next one, please. So risk factors for dementia, there are two types, non-modifiable and modifiable. So these ones most of you probably know about. Women get this a lot more than men. So 1 in 6 compared to 1 in 11. But it's family history, genetics, some rare forms, and age. So these are not modifiable. So next one, please. So all these ones we can modify. We have the power in our hands to minimise the risks of these. The last one is particularly startling to me, that the spouses of patients are 600% more likely to develop the disease themselves. Possibly because they're living under the same roof and eating and living the same way. We tend to share what we eat with our spouses. We might have the same exercise patterns and sleep patterns.
An infection.
Sorry?
It could be an infection.
It doesn't look like it is. It doesn't appear to be bacterial or viral. No, it's predominantly the lifestyle things as far as the research is showing. So, and social isolation as well. Like that might strike people as unusual, but that's very toxic to be too socially isolated. So coming along to community events like this and talking to other people is reducing isolation. So next one, please. Oh, one back, sorry. A key theme that comes through this is the genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So you may have the genetic predisposition, but I'll talk about this more later, but how you live decides whether that trigger is pulled or not. Next, please. So genetics is pretty small. I want to just zip through this and reassure you, but you might have heard of the ApoE genes, ApoE4 genes. It's not a certainty that you'll get Alzheimer's. So even if you have both, only a 50% chance of getting Alzheimer's by 65, age 65. So that's quite high, but lifestyle can mitigate that and reduce it a lot. So you might have heard in the media stories of people finding out they're homozygous, which means you have both copies of this gene and they're devastated. But living really well, eating well can mean it doesn't end up expressing. And only 2% of people have both those copies.
Do you know what chromosome the APO4 is on?
I don't actually know. Good question. I should find that out.
I'll be looking that up later.
Yeah, okay. Next one, please. So these genes also confer a very high risk, but they make up only 1% of Alzheimer's cases. So more people are getting genetic testing to look at these markers and if they have these alleles, these variants. So if you're worried, it might be something worth doing. But the key thing is to eat and live well. That's your best protection. Next, please. So epigenetics is really fascinating. This wasn't even a field when I did my PhD in human genetics. So this is, the gene sequence is fixed. So the nucleotides that form the double strand, you can't change those. They mutate a bit, but these things, histones and methylation, affect whether the gene can be turned on or off. So this can make a harmful gene unreadable, so it's not expressed, and that the disease or whatever that is conferred by that gene doesn't develop. And depending on how you live, it can also open up genes that are protective, that say reduce inflammation. So I'll come to it on the next slide. So this is some work by Dean Ornish, who's a pioneer in this area, and he was the first one to show that we could reverse heart disease in a randomised controlled trial with a very healthy diet. So he had two groups, one on a very healthy diet and one in the control group, and gene expression in 500 genes was beneficially affected. So this was turning down oncogenes that lead to cancer, atherosclerosis, inflammation, all these other negative things were down-regulated, the genes that affect those conditions. So incredibly powerful. So we have a lot of control over turning on the genes that protect us and turning off the genes that might harm us based on how we eat and live. Next, please. So with dementia, there are 4 biological processes which are interconnected to a large extent that seem to be responsible for most of the degeneration that we face. And I'll go into each of these one by one. So next one, please. Inflammation. You notice if you've ever bruised yourself and it goes red, that's inflammation, and that's acute inflammation, which is wonderful and important, and there's the body rushing extra blood and resources to heal that area. But chronic inflammation is really harmful, and it comes from constant irritants like poor diet, stress, alcohol, tobacco, other toxins, poor sleep, etc. So this is thought to be one of the key triggers of dementia. Next one, please. Also oxidative stress. So this comes back to the brain needing a lot of oxygen. So it's more at risk of oxidative damage because there's just more oxygen there. 25% of all our oxygen goes to the brain because it's such a hungry organ. So these processes that we have to protect us that neutralise the free radicals that oxygen creates can be damaged by unhealthy lifestyle. And so the more oxidative damage accrues. Whereas if you eat well, sleep well, manage stress, go to yoga like I did this morning, you know, these things are self-care behaviours that help keep you well and mean that any free radicals are neutered and taken out of the system so they can't harm you. Next, please. Glucose dysregulation. So this is what you know of as diabetes, but it can creep up and be pre-diabetic and you don't know you have it for many decades. So it's insulin resistance, which leads to diabetes, which leads to increased insulin production. This impairs our ability to clear out waste products. It's worse in the brain again because of the very high energy use. It's consuming a lot of glucose. Just as an example, half of this is from the Centre for Disease Control in the US, which is the peak body for disease. Half of all American adults now have pre-diabetes or are diabetic. We're not far behind. Same in India, same in China. These things are just escalating astronomically because of increasingly unhealthy diets. Too much fast food, too much processed food, not enough fruit and vegetables. So if you have diabetes, much higher risk of cognitive decline. So again, these things are all pointing in the same direction. Next one, please.
Can you have, is there anything that can come up in tests that might indicate that you could then become pre-diabetic? Is there like, do you just suddenly become pre-diabetic and then diabetic, or is there a gradual indicator?
Yeah, there is.
Before that?
Yeah, you can measure your HbA1c, which measures the glucose amount binding to the hemoglobin. So if your blood glucose is constantly a bit too high, more of it will bind to the hemoglobin, and that's a 3-month history of how well your glucose control was managed. You can also look at a fasting glucose measure. So first thing in the morning, get a blood test, and if the glucose is a bit high in the morning and the HbA1c is creeping up a little, because it moves up gradually to the point where the cutoff is then pre-diabetic, and then there's another cutoff when you're full diabetic.
Right.
So yeah, that can be tracked.
Right.
But it's the same behaviours that minimise dementia that will minimise the risk of diabetes and minimise the risk of heart disease and autoimmune disease. So it's not like there's one diet for diabetes, one for heart disease. It makes it easy because the same healthy diet will protect us from all these modern diseases, which is good. It's also better for the environment, which is another whole story, but I'm very interested in that area. So lipid dysregulation, so that the brain is very fatty. So high cholesterol leads to vascular disease, which I was talking about earlier, which is our biggest killer. This leads to formation of amyloid plaques. So this vascular disease, very high risk factor for dementia. So the cumulative trauma of these things I've just talked about leads to the dementia and Alzheimer's. So it's the combination of all those 4 things through unhealthy living and eating, which stresses and traumatizes the brain, and eventually it will reach a tipping point where the loss of function is diagnosable. Does that make sense? So that's a picture I found online of pork leaf fat. I didn't even know that was a thing, but makes me recoil in horror. But anyway, so next one, please. So this is a summary of lifestyle things that can damage us, and pointing into the damage to the brain. So next one, please. So there's no cure yet, and due to the complexity of the brain, there likely won't ever be one. Current medications used to relieve the behavioural symptoms, but don't do anything to slow or halt the progression of the disease. That's why it comes back to lifestyle. There's not a pill or an injection or anything that's likely to fix this. And if there was, like, it's kind of like saying high cholesterol is caused by lack of statins. That's a medication you get if your cholesterol's high. It's not. It's not caused by lack of statins. It's caused by the wrong diet and lifestyle. So similarly, you have to look at optimising the lifestyle to minimise your risks of this. It's not something that's a deficit of some kind of pill. Does that make sense? Next one, please. So there is some good news. As I said earlier, if you have only mild cognitive impairment, that can be reversed and further decline prevented. So this is the really important, exciting part, the key take-home message. Assuming you're all here and functioning normally, it's not too late to optimise your brain function. And people who switch to a super healthy diet, and I help people do this a lot in workplaces and private patients, one of the most common things they say after 2 or 3 weeks is that I feel sharper, my brain's more focused, I'm more productive at work, I think more clearly, the brain fog's lifted, because you're opening up the blood vessels with a healthy diet, the damages are recovering, and you're getting better brain, better blood to the brain and to the muscles. So people also feel more energy because they don't have sluggish blood that's struggling to get to the muscles, etc. So the whole body starts to work better because we need that blood to run properly. So if you think of a city that's getting gridlock, traffic congestion, all the productivity slows down because you can't get from A to B. It's the same with our vast network of blood vessels. They need to be clean and open and let the blood flow as needed to do all the functions that keep us running. Next one, please. So this is a great quote from Benjamin Franklin. So it's estimated about 90% of Alzheimer's can be prevented if modifiable risk factors are optimised. So this is very exciting because it's an enormously expensive and devastating disease that wrecks families. It's going to cost our country and the planet a lot of money in future as this escalates. So the earlier people can get in and change their lifestyle for the better their lives will be, and all those people around them who love them and care for them. So the brain is really a living universe, and it responds to how we care for it, how we feed it, how we challenge it, the ways we allow it to rest and restore. And sleep is critical for that. Just as an example about sleep, countries that have daylight saving, in spring when you set the clock forward an hour, you wouldn't think that would be very significant, but within the following 24 hours, the rate of heart attacks go up 24%. It's enormous. Like just 1 hour less sleep on average. Not everyone will do that because some people, go to bed a bit earlier leading up to it and maybe sleep in a bit more, but that's enormous change. And in autumn, the reverse happens, 21% lower rate of heart attacks in the day following the onset of the ending diabetes. This is super powerful. We underestimate sleep at our peril. It's so vital for all of our health. Next one, please. So this is kind of an analogy of Western medicine. They're treating the symptom, the water on the floor, without looking at the cause, the tap that's overflowing. And so lifestyle medicine is so exciting because it's the discipline of treating the upstream causes of illness. So if you make those right, the disease will usually reverse if it's not too late. So you can help people reverse type 2 diabetes, heart disease. Not so sure with cancer. Some people don't, some people do, but autoimmune diseases respond really well. Lots of major chronic diseases respond super well to lifestyle medicine, treating the upstream factors. Next one, please. So this is the modifiable risk factors again. Next one, please. So this is lifestyle medicine. So it's these 6 domains. Eating more plants, moving, exercise, sleeping well, not zoning out with alcohol and other drugs, managing stress and having good social connections. If you can optimise all these 6, you're much more likely to have a long, healthy, happy life. Because this affects mood as well. I've seen in many cases depression and anxiety and lifting when a person improves their lifestyle. Next one, please. So it's, as I said, addressing upstream determinants, not just treating symptoms with drugs or surgery. And there's a place for that in modern medicine. They have their roles, but it's much more effective to look at what's caused that disease and change those causal factors. Next one, please. So this is an example of the effect of nutrition. So people eating meat, fish or poultry had double the risk of dementia in this large study. Next one, please.
Does that have to do with the amount though? Like, that's a general term.
It does,
those
yeah.
Who ate meat.
Yeah.
How much meat? How much?
This is comparing it to people who didn't at all.
Right, but does that mean once a week or 5 times a week?
It doesn't. I
Doesn't
didn't.
matter?
Yeah, it would. The more the less the better. But the effect of the damage of those things to the body and the brain and our lipids is less the less you have.
Yeah.
So it's a gradient. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. Next one. Eating 5 or more portions of fruit and veggies a day significantly associated with a 47% prevalence of cognitive impairment. And the dietary guidelines for Australia. Yeah.
Even fish is bad as well?
Yeah. It also has high levels of mercury depending on how long the food chain, which is damaging the brain particularly. We've used the oceans as a sewer for...
From the fish, like a salmon, you will get the good omega-3.
The fish get it from...
Conflicting sometimes.
The fish don't make it. They get it from algae that they eat, or it comes through the food chain. We can get it from algae, or we can get it from flax seeds, or walnuts, or dark leafy greens.
But as far as I know, like if you have one piece of salmon fish is
Yeah.
good source of. I know chia seed has a omega-3, and people who are having a lots of fish, not eating the meat, they are good health. Like a seafood, like a sea fish is really good. So
The research shows it's better without it. They're accumulating all the toxins we put in the ocean for 300 years. So mercury, PCBs, dioxins, all these nasty chemicals that we've used, flushed into the ocean from industry. But the other thing is the oceans are in collapse through overfishing. The scientists are predicting by 2050 there may not be any fish left in the sea. And if the oceans die, we go. We can't survive without healthy oceans. So it's not sustainable. There's no such thing as sustainable fishing.
there's the different things. My question was like, we know that omega-3 is very good for our, even somebody has like a dementia, Parkinson, or Alzheimer, any for the brain.
You don't need extra
Omega-3
actually.
I'm not a nutritionist, sorry.
No.
But as far I know, omega-3 is a very good. I know there's the other source of omega-3. Like I'm taking the supplement for the, omega-3.
The research doesn't really support that.
Sorry?
The research doesn't support that we need to take it. You get a lot from dark leafy greens, from walnuts in particular, ground flax seeds, chia seeds, as you mentioned, have some hemp seeds, and some. But
Do you get enough from them?
you do.
You do.
Yeah.
Okay.
The science is unclear and it's wavering back and forth a little bit. We just don't know enough. But there's no obvious signs of deficiency of it in the vast majority of the population if they eat well.
The meat is not good, I know, but sometimes doctor advise us you have to take red meat, otherwise your get iron deficiency. That's the another issue. So actually very hard to maintain.
Keep in mind that doctors get almost zero nutrition training. They're not the best people to get nutrition advice from. Many of them have gone down the keto road, which is very harmful. And they just not across the science of nutrition.
I always think you go to the expert. I mean, if you've got a sore foot, I wouldn't go to a doctor, I'd go to a podiatrist.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's the same
Yeah.
with this, I think.
Yeah, GPs are pretty... Well, they've actually done research in the US comparing GPs' nutrition knowledge to the layperson on the street. And GPs lost. They knew less about food than the average person.
Doctor never advise any lifestyle, nothing.
Well, no, they're not trained in lifestyle medicine.
They never advise anything, just
Well, they might say eat better, or lose weight, but...
Why do you say
might be
keto
they
is
are not
not?
allowed to speak about the lifestyle of food, doctor.
More and more they're learning this. The lifestyle organisations around the world are growing quite fast. So they are starting to get a different perspective, but it's not being taught at med schools yet. Sorry, you had a question?
Why do you say keto is harmful?
The research shows it shortens your life. And it pushes up your cholesterol, you're more likely to get heart disease, cancer. It's medium to short-term benefits in terms of weight loss. It's better than the average Western diet because it takes out the processed food and the dairy, which is helpful. But all that fat and animal food is terrible for our long-term health. So I definitely wouldn't advise it. In fact, for my opinion, it'd be malpractice to advise it because the science is so clear that it will shorten your life. It's popular and there's a lot of hype around it, but it's not backed up by the science.
So Mediterranean food is good.
Mediterranean's better than how we eat now, but it's not good enough to protect you completely because it has a lot of oil, dairy, some fish, some chicken. It's still things that will harm us. The science says the less of those things, the better. So it is a step forward on how people eat mostly today in countries like Australia. But you can do better, the science shows. Sorry, you had a question?
Just like to add something about the conversation that you have had. The biggest consumer of plastic is fish. And the biggest consumer of fish are the cows in the farm. So that food chain is already broken. I know that information you're referring to is all from marketing, unfortunately. And it has been sitting in our subconscious for a while. But I just wanted to add that
Even
one.
the same the plant as well. You are saying that all the fish they're consuming the plastic. If you consider all the plant-based food, all are toxic too because people are using the pesticide. We are not free from that. That is the
It's a good point.
chain, yeah.
Which is why I buy mostly organic.
Chain, because I know it's very hard to get the organic vegetable and expensive. That's the different thing. But you can't confirm that is the 100% organic, because if you are producing your vegetable without pesticide and any, you know, inorganic fertilizer, anything, whatever, if your next neighbors, they are using the fertilizer and chemicals, insecticide, when the rain coming, the water draining, and